Welcome to the Dawn Jarvis Show. This is the podcast where we talk to busy leaders and professionals about who they are, what they do, and why they do it. We also talk about how they stay focused, positive, and productive, and how, as very busy people, they maintain their own health and well-being. Today's guest is Kathy Robinson, and we are going to learn why it's important to live wholeheartedly, the components and practices of holistic well-being, and how to take action to enhance your well-being using the Athena Principles. I met Kathy on Pat Flynn's heroic online courses, and we went on to be members of a mastermind that developed out of that. And Kathy left corporate life at the height of her career to follow her passion. Founding Athena Wellness, she helps clients holistically reinvent themselves through wellness and business coaching, online education, podcasting, blogging, and speaking. Kathy also hosts the Athena Wellness Podcast and is the author of the Athena Principles, Simple Wellness Practices for Overworked Professionals. Kathy.
Dawn, it's so good to see you. Thank you so much for having me here today.
You're so welcome. It's so good to see you. Very impressive bio. I know you've got a podcast. I've got a podcast. We know each other from our mastermind. It's brilliant to see you then. I'm so looking forward to our chat. The first question I want to ask you, in your bio, it says that you left your career at its height to follow your passion. So I'm really interested in how you got to be where you are today and working on wholehearted living.
Yeah. Well, I wish I could tell you I had all the answers and I had it all figured out when I left, but that was not the case. I actually spent almost 3.5 decades in corporate life. I was the first kid to graduate college. I grew up in a blue collar background and came out with a lot of debt when I graduated from school. And what was paying in the 1980s was Wall Street. And so I wound up going to Wall Street, of all things, as an internal auditor. I had no idea what that meant. But as a kid from New Jersey, these companies were going to give me the opportunity to learn all about business and travel the world. And I was like, check that out, having no idea that I was going to be doing it as long as I did. But I spent 18 years on Wall Street. And then I left to join a Fortune 250, and I was there for 15 years, half of that as its chief audit executive and its chief risk officer. But I always had this passion. I can't say always. The first 10 years of my career, I was a work hard, play hard kind of gal. That's what we did in the 80s on Wall Street, right?
Yeah.
Until it was no longer working for me very well as I got older. And for the last 20 years or so, wellness was my release valve. And I found that when I entered my 50s, I was actually feeling fitter in my 50s than my 30s. And I got really curious about that. I became a certified wellness coach while I was working. And I started Athena Wellness, not as a for-profit business at that point, but to blog and to write the book and do things that I could do while I was still working. And it's a dream now. I feel like I've reinvented myself at midlife, and that's what I help my clients do. Athena is, as you know, the Greek goddess, and she symbolizes strength and wisdom. And those are the two qualities I try to have my clients see in themselves and utilize as they go through personal and professional transformations.
Amazing. I really like what you said about you feeling fitter in your 50s than you did in your 30s, because I think, we're about the same age, aren't we? So that, when you're in your 30s, you're, as you said, working hard, playing hard. It's all going by in a blur, but there's always the future, and that, you can think about that later. But when you're in your 50s, your future's a bit more infant. No, it's not as infinite as it is in your 30s. So you have to think about it a bit more. You have to think about, well, I can't carry on doing this forever. So what am I going to do? And I really like what you said about, I like the title Athena anyway. In Britain, there was a card shop called Athena that used to sell brilliant posters of Porsches in the 80s. And so I like that anyway. It's very evocative for me. But I love what you said about sort of wisdom, and what was the strength and wisdom, wasn't it?
Strength and wisdom.
I really like that. So, so why is it important to live wholeheartedly? So I know that's what we're talking about. And I spoke to a friend and I said I was doing this podcast today about, we're doing a podcast about living wholeheartedly. And he said to me, what's that? What is wholehearted living? So
Perfect.
I said to him, I'll tell you later.
Well, I stumbled on this as well. I was sitting in the audience in 2014 in Manhattan, and I was listening to speaker and poet David White. And he was telling a story. The days before he became a poet and a speaker, he was working for a nonprofit organization, and he was experiencing high levels of stress and exhaustion. And a friend of his came, and over a bottle of wine, he asked this wise friend, "Tell me about exhaustion." And the friend said, the antidote to exhaustion is not necessarily rest. The antidote to exhaustion is wholeheartedness. The reason why you're so exhausted is because you are not having the conversation you were meant to have with life. You're not living out who you are in the world. That's what's causing the exhaustion. And it was one of those moments, I was in the audience. It was like this clarity hit me that David articulated what I felt from time to time in my life and in my work of, by outside appearances, as you said in the intro, like I look successful, right? I had this career and I was dedicated and responsible, all of the things that you would think of living a good life. But was I wholehearted? Was I having the conversation that I was meant to have with life? Like, that's a really big question. And so I began to just hold that. It's not something that you answer, right? It's something that you kind of live with and you think about. And I wonder, like, what would it be like to experience wholeheartedness in my work, in my life? What would that look like for me? To live with no reservations, to commit with all my enthusiasm. Like, wholeheartedness has an enthusiastic quality. It has an uplifting, energetic quality, which is not the quality we have usually when we're going through our days, right?
Yeah.
And to embrace all parts of myself. That was a big one for me. I have a tendency to live a little bifurcated. This is my life, and then this is my career. Back then, I lived that way. And so I started to note, who was I when I was living this way? What got in the way when I wasn't? And how do I start to address that? What's interesting is that the absence of wholeheartedness, the reason why your friend couldn't define it is because we usually don't think we're living that way, but we know when it's not there. And what that can feel like is that when you feel a little off track, when you're not really engaged with your life the way you've defined it, and in extreme cases like David and me, at the end of my Wall Street career, I was just flat out burnt out. That's the absence of wholeheartedness. That's when your true self is not being fed. That's the result. And so usually that's what we can describe. And there's three ways that wholeheartedness can be impacted that I've found: disconnect, expectations, and comparison. So the disconnect is when we have established beliefs and values, roles that we play in our lives, those can become outdated. And it's not often that we just mindfully think about, well, what role am I playing? Like, is this still fit for me? Because we outgrow these things. That's growth. So one is when we have old beliefs or values or roles. The second is the expectations of others, of our loved ones, of society, of our employers, who we need to be when we go out into the world, and our own expectations. I know this was a big one for me, right? How I would push myself more and more and more. And the last one is comparison. And I think this has taken on more importance the last 10 years or so, when we're stimulated 24/7 by images, by, information that's just doubling by incredible speeds. And we're seeing curated lives that maybe don't look like ours. And so it's all of this input and then this dissonance we feel on who we really are inside and who we're showing up with, how we're showing up in the world. And that's where wellness comes in. Because when we feel that distance, when we feel that discomfort, that I feel this way, but yet I'm this person in the outside world, that's what we numb. And we can numb that with, the corporate treadmill that can be a numbing agent. That worked very well for me for a long time, right? Unhealthy habits. We can use alcohol, social media, food, fill in the blank of whatever that might be for you. So to me, long-winded way of saying wholeheartedness is really a wellness practice. It's how do we identify and acknowledge and address these disconnects that I've talked about. And the good news is you don't have to quit your job at the height of your career. You can take small steps. In fact, if you think about it, I heard David White speak in 2014. I didn't leave the corporate world until 2019. And it's not saying that you have to make that kind of a leap, but what he did for me is he made me aware that when I was stepping outside of my true self, I was at least mindful of that. And I wasn't on this like automatic response of numbing. And so over time, it's this sense of remembering, of stripping away this excess to get to your core and living from that place.
Wonderful. I really like that explanation. It's very evocative for me, and around that you have to be, you can be successful, you can have a really good job, you can have a house, you can have a car, you can have perfect a relationship, kids, whatever, but still not be happy and feel that something's missing. And I enjoyed my job. Actually, it was a passion thing. Nursing was great, I loved it, but sort of like the amount of time it took to do it well meant that I couldn't spend as much time with my children. I think the term is mortgage slave. Sort of it came at a price.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found that sort of being a business owner is that, and it's still, I still have struggles with it, but it's around finding out the thing that brings me joy, that makes me feel happy, that I want to do and spread the message I want to and work with the people I want to, doing all the things that I enjoyed as a nurse, that, in that corporate job, but also, enjoying it and not doing the, not thinking, oh, you're working for the man and, stuff like that. So that's really, really good. Very, very evocative.
Yeah, thank you. And there are always trade-offs. There always will be. And it's just the more that you know and you can connect, the better. Like you can almost use that as a litmus test to make decisions.
Yeah, I love that. So what are the components and practices of holistic well-being? So we've talked about how it feels not to be wholehearted, and the signs that maybe you could live differently. So so what sort of are the components around that, living a different life, or noticing different things and connecting in the way that you say?
Yeah. And I think I always like to start with this. The main tenet of my wellness philosophy is that the body's natural tendency is toward health and self-healing. I actually had a podcast guest on my show. She was a wellness professional. And she said, when you cut your arm, you don't need to tell your body how to heal. And so that's what I mean, that we have this innate knowledge, and it's learning to trust our mind, body, and spirit to self-regulate and to get us to a state of wellness. And so if we believe that our natural state of wellness is the starting point, we can think about wellness on a spectrum. And on one end, we're moving toward wellness. We're moving toward the things that make us feel good. And on the other end, we can have practices that lead us toward chronic illness, toward illness in general, right? So it's kind of this continuum. And there are practices that can move us from one state to the other. But before I get to the practices, there are two things of late, given these last 2 years, that I'm learning more about. There's research that's being done that's kind of blown my mind. And I just wanted to share those two things. And that is two big drivers that can drive us toward chronic illness. We know about stress, but it moves us into this red zone because it comes from the caveman response, right? How we respond to danger, this fight or flight, and the release of cortisol. And when I think about my corporate days, I was on this adrenaline cycle, this coffee in my later years, a fueled cycle. And you are constantly releasing cortisol. And what that does, it can feel like, oh, it's just tightness in the chest, or it's, it's a rapid heartbeat or blood pressure. but this continual release is not a good state for us to be in. And actually, a friend of mine just told me about something. They're doing some research on how stress can also have us hold our breath. And they're doing research on something called email apnea, that when you check your email, that slight breath that you hold can actually stimulate fight or flight. And think about how many times you check your email during the day. Like, it's crazy, right?
I love that they're doing the research on that. That's fantastic.
Something as simple as that can put us in fight or flight. And then the second one is social isolation, which many are experiencing that. But the how it can shift us to chronically impaired disease, it increases the risk of Alzheimer's, substance abuse, we know, mental health impact, we know, but stroke and heart disease as well. And they're finding that the mortality can equal smoking or obesity or excess alcohol or physical inactivity. And I would have never made that connection. So I just share that it might not be the things that you know aren't good for you. Sometimes it's your environment and the times that we find ourselves in that can put us in a state that's taking us out of what our body is trying so hard to keep us in, this natural state of wellness, and shift us into more of a chronic state. And so with that as a backdrop, I share that because when I design wellness practices for clients, we have to take into account current activity in their lives. So if somebody is feeling the effects, this isolation effect where they have too much space, well, we can find appropriate wellness activities to add, to increase, and to eliminate that feeling of isolation. On the flip side, many are feeling this sense of being overwhelmed and too much stress and not enough time. Well, I wouldn't want to add a practice. That would just be adding something to the load. We actually can have them stop doing something that is impacting their health. So it's not taking more time, but it's having an increased benefit to their wellness. So as an example, we're going to talk a little bit about a tool that I have called the Holistic Wellness Spectrum that gives you wellness practice points, intention points over body, mind, and spirit. And so using that as a framework, if somebody is feeling like they need something else in their life from a physical perspective, they could add hours of sleep, or they could try a new eating protocol where they'd have to do some research and they'd have to spend some time creating meals. Or if they wanted to add movement, they could add a new exercise routine. Somebody who is totally stressed, who doesn't have the time, has no time for any of that, but they could add to the quality of their sleep. And there are things that we can do for the time that they have to sleep. We can make that the most impactful. From a nutrition perspective, maybe they try intermittent fasting, where they're giving their body a break. They don't have to make one meal a day. So that can add to time and also something that's good for their body. And for movement, instead of adding a routine, how do we incorporate it into their day? We can take that tact. Same thing for mind. If somebody's looking to add something to their routine, they can try a new creative expression or some online learning. For somebody who needs a mental break and can't add something, they can actually limit their tech and their social media exposure, have a great impact on their wellness. And lastly, for spirit, for connection, folks who have the capacity can deepen their relationship with others through volunteering and through being of service. If somebody is already stressed, that's probably not a good answer for them, but they can deepen their relationship with themselves by giving them something as little as 5 minutes a day, where it's just time with themselves saying, I am gifting this to myself for the next 5 minutes. There's nothing I need to do. Nobody needs me. I don't need to make a decision. I'm just going to be in this space and feel what this expanse feels like. And that's the way I like to work through where people are.
Love it. I absolutely love it. I really love the recognition that if you're in this state where you feel you're on the hamster wheel, you actually can't conceive how you can change it. And people can make helpful suggestions. I've made them and have them made to myself. And you're thinking, I haven't got time for that. But sort of like, how can you incorporate exercise into your routine? Like, is it literally just walking to the shops once a day? buying a paper and coming back, or is it something else like going up and down the stairs, or carrying something when you're doing it? I really like about sort of taking time for yourself, and before, when you spoke about the research about social isolation, the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, the way we live our lives, I don't think people do recognize that, but I know from my work as a nurse that the impacts of that will be felt in hospitals and in care facilities going forward, and they'll be able to track it back to this time in history, literally. And so it's good to recognize that, and to give people the space and the grace, isn't it, as well, to sort of like think about it, but not feel, oh, I need to do and I need to go to the gym every day. I need to go on a diet and lose 4 stone. That what can you do? I really like the emphasis on what you can stop and what you can do a little bit more of as well. Yeah. So that is fantastic. Yeah. So you talked a little bit about it in that segment of the podcast, but I wanted to sort of talk to me about the Athena Principles and how people can take action.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll tell you a little bit about why I wrote the book. And as I mentioned, feeling better in my 50s than my 30s, I wanted to be able to share that methodology and the philosophy, which, by the way, I didn't even know I had. Like sitting down to write the book and looking back was really helpful to me to be able to articulate that. But through my story and the stories of others, it's really about helping readers reconnect with their mind, body, and spirit through a methodology that includes tools, principles, and practices. And so at a high level, and I'll touch on a few of these, but the tools help readers assess their current state and to track progress. The principles are self-compassion, intention, consistency, growth mindset, and accountability. And I'll briefly touch on those. And then the related practices for each one of these principles. There are some writing exercises, some meditation exercises, and I use meditation loosely. These are more incorporated in the day. And then there are positive actions. What are the small steps that we can take to start to step into this new way of living, to this new way of feeling? It's almost like being your own cheerleader in some ways. And the tagline is simple wellness practices for overworked professionals, to emphasize these don't take a lot of time and you can make some progress. So starting with the tool, the one thing I wanted to highlight, aside from a wellness assessment, which kind of gives you a you are here and a look forward to where you want to be, the one tool that I created that I really liked is something called a holistic wellness spectrum. And as I had mentioned, it's really a tool to help set wellness intentions and to help you take action. And it's not there are some things that you would expect to see, like from a physical standpoint of things that you can do. But there's also this sense of flow or mind, creativity, letting go, simplifying, things like that are on in the middle section. And then at the end, it's connection, our relationships, adventure, having some fun. All of these things are part of wellness as well. It's been my experience and mine as well that usually people start with something physical because it's tangible. You can see the output. But then once you start to feel better, you notice opportunities to address your emotional and your spiritual selves and strengthen those as well. And I've had 3 critical wellness turning points that I go through in the book in that order. Like first one was physical, the second one was mental, and the third one was more spiritual, each one allowing me to go deeper in my life. And when I look back, it's like, at the time, it felt like an unmarked path. But of course, I look back and say, well, of course, once I got my body in better shape, I had a clearer mind. I could explore things like purpose outside of myself. And then lastly, going deep on values and really listening to know who I am and why I'm here, which is when I was listening to David White back in the day. So to me, that's the journey of what I like to call optimal well-being. So I just wanted to touch on the 5 principles because I find that these were really the key to sustaining long-term change. This isn't drop 10 pounds. Like this isn't that kind of philosophy. This is more long-term. And interestingly enough, once I became an entrepreneur, not only do they work for wellness, they work for business as well. Yeah. So just for the entrepreneurs out there, keep that in mind as you're listening. So the first principle, and I made it the first principle because it's the one that I learned last. And it's the one that I have to consistently remind myself of, and that's self-compassion. And the way I define that is when you're assessing where you are today to where you want to go, there's a gap. And how you choose to navigate that gap, that to me is where there's opportunity for self-compassion, right? If you can navigate that territory gently, it's actually one of the kindest things you can do for yourself, but it's also, you feel less resistance. It's less difficult when you do it with self-compassion. That's been my experience, the experience of clients. And so some questions we can ask on how we can be more supportive of ourselves when we're making change, or how can I be more accepting and less judgmental? Like, that's the kind of attitude. The second principle is intention. Different than goals. There's a chart in the book that shows the difference between the two. Goals being more ego-driven, more external, more visible. Intentions are really, when you're working on any kind of change, taking some time to reflect on why you want to make the change. Why are you committing your energy to making this change? How will you feel once the change is made? That's what gets you out of bed in the morning when it's cold and you don't want to get out of bed and exercise. Like, the ego part of, oh, I wanted to run a marathon in 6 months. That's not going to get you out of bed. I want to feel better as I age because I want to be here for my grandkids. I want to be able to play with them, as I get older. That's what gets you out of bed. So intention is really the why behind your action. The third one is consistency. For me, the auditor in me, this is really the secret component to it all, because it's you keeping an important commitment with yourself. And that's so easy to override. So it's how are you showing up, and also being realistic. When you pick a frequency and the amount of time you can spend on making this change, make it realistic with where you currently are, not where you may be in 6 months. You can always increase, but how do we start realistically, keep ourselves accountable to that? If we do one thing consistently, it makes a world of difference, and it gives us momentum, and we can build on that. The fourth principle is growth mindset. And I define this as positive attitude plus constructive behaviors is growth mindset. And it's about seeing the challenges that we will inevitably face as opportunities. What can I learn here? What can I do differently? If we're feeling stuck, it's always great to pause and look backwards. Like this morning, it was 13 degrees Fahrenheit when I had to get out in the snow and go to CrossFit.
Oh, wow.
So what got me up at 5 o'clock this morning? It wasn't the workout that was there. It was more of, there are so many things that are working well in my body now as a result of that. Like, I feel good. I'm getting up this morning. It's cold. I don't have any aches and pains. That's what gets me up. So how do we take the challenge of, oh, I don't want to go out, to this is why I want to go out. I get to go out because this is the way I get to feel. And then the last one is accountability. Once a week, and I've done this for a long time, on Sunday nights, check in with myself. Celebrate the areas of wins. I came to this late in life as well, to pause, to celebrate, to integrate these things that worked well, take responsibility for any setbacks, and then compassionately modify what you can do differently the next week. And that compassion brings you right back to the top, which is self-compassion.
Amazing. I really like that. That is wonderful. I love that methodology. And I love how it started with self-compassion and ended with accountability and taking responsibility. But that regular and the consistency thing around that is sort of like regularly reviewing it as well. I'm not an auditor, but I used to do audit as a nurse and as a change manager. It's really important to know what does success look like and how will you know when you get there. And I think you've incorporated that into that. So by having an intention that's not a goal, and the sort of the measure is how will it make me feel. And and you probably, when you work with your clients, so how do you feel now and how do you want to feel? So you are moving from somewhere to somewhere. There is a journey in it, and it's a heroic journey in it, Kathy. And that's
exactly right.
And so that you're moving and taking stuff and taking stock as well, and replanning and resetting. I really I really, really like that. And how do you help people to sort of like with this journey?
Yeah. And as I was say, all of this right now is theory to this point until you put it into action. And that's
Absolutely.
and that's really the last phase. And a simple actionable plan on one thing. And so you can use a notebook, a calendar, spreadsheet. I use a combination. There's also at the end of this, I'll give your listeners a link for a free download that actually has the holistic wellness spectrum. It's got the principles and a little action plan that goes by principle that you can fill in, which I find helpful because to remind myself of self-compassion, of intention, and so on as I'm reviewing the week, I find to be helpful. But to take a few minutes of everything that you've heard today, was there one thing that was intriguing to you? Not something that you should do, but something that would feel more nourishing. Like, what might that thing be, that something that you feel maybe has been lacking, or maybe you haven't been giving enough attention? If you can find that thing that resonated and identify one small step, and then try to determine what might some obstacles be, and kind of address them up front of what might I do when it's 13 degrees out and I have to go, get out of bed. Like, what are those things? My clothes were out, the car keys were out. Like, I really didn't have an excuse,
Yeah.
So,
Good
and
planning.
then, as you've just mentioned, how will you feel once you incorporated the practice? I find that if you can think about how life will change, and you begin to align your behaviors to a person who lives that way. And that to me is a really compassionate way of trying to implement change without it being so, as I was on myself. I was really hard on myself for a lot of years, to more of being curious of like, what would that be like? What would that person do? And as we do so many decision points during our day, to have that picture in our head that we can make it. Do I really want to do X? Because the person who lives the way I want to live would probably do Y. You know what? Maybe I'll try Y. Those little decision points during the day, that's what adds up to big change and to wellness.
Brilliant. And we will have a link to the action plan and the sort of the link to what Kathy was talking about. That will be in the show notes. And I know that you've done a lot of work on this because we talk quite regularly, and sort of so I wanted you to talk about a little bit of how you help people with this, what you offer. I know so you've got the book. I know you're doing a course, and you've got things on your website. So how can people get hold of you, work with you, and find out more about the stuff that you do, Kathy?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the good news is there's a lot of free stuff out there. In fact, I just took a look at my website with a more of a clear eye, like not as the person that owns it. And I was like, wow, like there's a lot of stuff here. So there's about 100 blogs out there. There's over 100 podcasts now. So certainly a lot of free content. The book is on Amazon, and it's all linked up on my website. There's a lot of podcast interviews there as well. And I do consulting. I've done corporate webinars, taking people through this. I do one-on-one coaching. The online course is going to be launching this spring. And anybody who has any questions for any reason, just reach out. You can reach me at athenawellness.com, and it's all there.
The links will be in the show notes. And Kathy, I'm a nurse, this, and the theme of the podcast, like you're almost the perfect guest to talk about health and wellness of entrepreneurs, but also people like me and you who've come from a corporate background, led that, type A personalities, driven, and may not look after their health and well-being. So I always ask my guests two questions. How do you manage to stay focused, positive, and productive? And you're probably going to say that using the Athena Principles, which you've talked about already. And also, how do you manage your own health and well-being, which you may also say using the Athena Principles. But it's just so I find that people relate to people's real life experiences, and you've talked and I've talked about how the corporate grinds a lot, and that you need to think about how you want to live your life. So it would be really good to hear how you incorporate, this into your own life.
Sure. And you're right. Actually, it is, my philosophy is what's in the book, but I will tell you probably one of the biggest changes that I didn't anticipate when I left corporate. And actually, this is what my course is about. When you leave such a structured career, you have tools and you have methods of working that have worked for you for decades, and they don't have value. They don't have, it's like a currency with no value when you move out of that environment.
Yeah.
And so even though I was ready, I had the business up and running. There is such a shift in your mental approach that nobody really talks about. And that's kind of what I'm addressing with this course. How do you start to use some of the things that we've talked about today, but in a way to create a new infrastructure for this new person that you're becoming? So it's almost like inner scaffolding. And as I'm saying these words, I'm going, yeah, that's what it is. Like,
you're a guru, Kathy. I'm loving this.
Right. And so they always say that you teach what you need to learn.
Absolutely.
As I'm going through this, I'm like, that was the biggest thing. And you would think it's being, you're working from home now, you have to be more structured. It's actually the opposite. What I am inviting is this sense of ease. And I'll share a brief story. When I first came out of corporate, a friend of mine who was very intuitive and has known me for a long time took a look at me and what I was talking about and how I was conducting my business. And she said, you're on this think of this beautiful sailboat, like not a little, like you're on this big sailboat. There are people that you love on this sailboat, and your instinct is to get out and push the sailboat. Stop pushing the sailboat.
I love that.
You said you need to realize you can hoist a sail, you can drop anchor, you can let the wind take you, you can drift, you can turn on the motor. Don't push the sailboat. And so it's this sense, in fact, on my screensaver is an image of a sailboat, because I have to remind myself that this is less about what you can do when you push it. Mm-hmm. What happens if you tried ease? Yeah. What would that be like? Yeah. And I have to tell you, there's it doesn't negate having to show up every day, having to work out, but that change in mindset, even when I working out my body hard, or I'm doing something at the business that is my new, you're always working your edge when you have that business, right? Yeah. How might you be able to do that with a little bit, trust yourself, trust your experience, trust your creative response, that whatever it is that you're being faced with, you'll be able to do it, and take that breath. And so that's really been probably, if I have to name one new wellness practice these last couple of years, that would be it. Inviting ease and trusting myself that I'll be able to do whatever it is that life is presenting. And it's been wonderful so far.
Oh, this is amazing. This is really good stuff. So it's been amazing having you on and talking about you. That's something so closely aligned to the theme of the podcast. And there's lots of tips and nuggets that you shared with us. People can download, you're downloadable, and hear some more about you and contact you. Is there one thing that you would leave our listeners and audience with as we close the show?
Yeah. So I would say, don't forget that the whole point in taking good care and living wholeheartedly is so that you can fully embrace who you are, to be able to do the things that you love with the people that you love. It's that simple. How do we really enjoy life? And some of these things, it's my hope that this idea of living wholeheartedly will give you that gift, that you can, taking action to live your life in a way that you define it, is really your ultimate act of power. That's what Athena was all about, right? So I thank you very much, Dawn, and I wish you and your listeners many days of wholehearted living. Thanks so much for the opportunity today.
You are so welcome. That was fantastic. And thank you, Kathy. And that's it for the Dawn Jarvis show today. It's been a good one today. If you like what you hear, contact Kathy, comment, subscribe, share, and we will see you soon. It's been fantastic. Take care. Bye-bye.